Well, welcome back, everyone. After the long break that we just had, anyways, or if you hopefully maybe got something to eat or some lunch, anyways. Today the talk is going to be starting in games user research with only a high school degree, learning experience, opportunities, and struggles. I think this talk will probably be very valuable for juniors, especially. And I think if there are some researchers that have already been very experienced, you can probably get a little bit of a taste or a case study of some of the new wave of researchers that are going to be coming in. So my name is Tyler Sterle. I'm a junior in informatics at Indiana University, and I'm more so specializing my studies on human-computer interaction. And you might be wondering to yourself, anyways, why a undergraduate might be speaking at this point, anyways. And I think with this talk, anyways, I might need to kind of sort of introduce myself more into the past with kind of how I started in games user research, and a little bit with my origin points, anyways. So originally, when I discovered user experience, it was like a few years ago, anyways, I was a UX moderator slash like analyst. I had like this internship at this company still called Student Connections that does software for financial literacy, like in learning basically. And it was kind of just the end of my junior year of high school. And I just randomly thought like to myself, kind of like, well, what if you can actually do this with games anyways? And sure enough, it does exist. So I learned about it because I found it from the grux.org website anyways. And I had this like instant spark, like this interest in learning about it anyways. But I kind of didn't really have much education at this point yet. I hadn't even really started college. So it seemed a little daunting to be able to kind of get into or break into that industry anyways, but I was still very interested anyways. And I was learning, at least at the time, and this is about 3 or 4 years ago now, but at least at the time, many of those researchers that I was seeing, just from like online, were starting in graduate school or had kind of adapted from some other kind of like related industry. And I was kind of bummed out about that, honestly, because I was thinking, well, if it was my junior year in high school, that meant that I had to wait like 6 years until I could actually finally start doing anything related to games user research. And so I was thinking, is that really it? Do I have to wait like right now, like as a junior? Like, can I sort of get into this industry or start learning things a little bit earlier, anyways? So basically, I just looked at every possible source I could to learn about anything here. I started obviously with that grux.org, the Games User Research SIG website, which had plenty of good knowledge and articles and papers and videos and such that people have been posting for many years up to that point. Gama Sutra, definitely a great website for that as well, where there's lots of articles. And traditionally, it had lots of articles for like other roles in the games industry, anyways. Twitter and LinkedIn also great because I could see who was already out there, like already like some sort of industry professionals or people like me who are students and wanted to get into the field. And then this Games User Research Summit, which we would have had this year, unfortunately had to be canceled just due to the recent crisis that's been going around. But that was also a really great source of knowledge to teach you on quite a variety of topics very, very early on that you might not even think about at first. Getting to see lots of researchers take you through like their own case studies and their experiences related to those topics. And there was a lot of articles from Microsoft Research as well, just because they had been doing a lot of pioneering in the field of games user research for a while, especially when like with Halo and various other titles anyways. And so I was, for probably a few months, just kind of wondering, I was reading all these articles, watching all these videos, and trying to connect to people anyways that I could see. And I was thinking, well, I guess that's just it. That's the end. And I kind of thought about that for a while, and I thought, well, maybe I have to wait for a couple more years. I really have to, and that's the only way I could get involved in the industry, anyways. So I was thinking, is it possible to get any sort of practical experience without actually being hired or being in college to the point where it's some sort of like master's thesis or whatever, what have you, like some sort of project like that. Um, and at first, I kind of did these guerrilla-like studies actually, where they're not exactly perfect, but it's really just getting me the opportunity to try out some of these methods that I've been learning throughout time. Like right here, I actually just had a friend of mine where we were basically having him play through the first hour of Half-Life, trying to do basically like a usability test. And it's very open as far as the kinds of criteria that we were looking at, anyways. Um, but it was really, it wasn't something like super specific at the time, but it was really just giving me the opportunity to see what it was like to observe a human being and to try to like learn things from that and to try to understand their experience by having them do like think aloud methods and talk out loud and kind of take all those sources of data together to help teach me anyways. And just kind of helping to discover those positives and pain points of the experience, and really gaining that sense of empathy for them anyways, like where you are almost being like an advocate for the player. um, and the point is, anyways, that it didn't have to be perfect, and that I was learning how to do that for the first time because some other people might have gotten this experience of like qualitative observation from like from other sort of like industries or research experience, like if it's some sort of other humanities research or psychology or whatever like that. But this was my first experience. I didn't actually bridge over to it. I just immediately started with the games by themselves. And so that was great. Anyway, so before I got to that slide, actually, so that was great. Anyways, I had a friend that was doing this with, but I kind of wanted to see if I could make some steps further into sort of emulating a more realistic experience, even though, of course, I was working on a very tight budget here. Um, so what I did is I was thinking, how can I, like recruit people that aren't exactly like my friends, but just, people that I don't even know, like volunteers. Like, how do I get those sort of people right now when I don't have like any money or background that says that I should be able to do this, um, or just that I was in a position to be doing that. Um, well, it turns out I was in a high school, and there were lots of clubs going around. There were lots of clubs with just organizations with lots of different people in it, and that's actually what I did. Is I turned it into a club, basically, where it was really, it was really just this experience where I was still recruiting people, they come play and test out games anyways for me to practice, like observing anyways. But I sort of like sold it as this club, and that is actually a real like cutout from my high school yearbook, of a quote that someone did like from an interview, basically. And it's from my knowledge, it's not really a real club anymore. Which I mean, there wasn't really much support later on afterwards, anyways. But essentially, yeah, there was this club, and I would have people come like usually once or twice a week for some sort of actual test, and then at home or like after school, I would be doing some sort of analysis work with and also planning like with the studies that we were doing at this point. Um, and so that was great. I now had actual, I had people at this point that weren't my friends. Of course, there's still a little bit of a volunteer bias, but it's getting to the point now where I'm sort of like getting like higher and higher steps up towards trying to emulate a more realistic experience. And so I was thinking, I got the people and everything. I got this now, but now I needed some games, because I really wanted to experience what it was like to work with an actual developer and have that relationship that we've been building with each other, because I've heard that that was really, really important. And I didn't think I'd be able to do that very easily with games like Half-Life that were more like from AAA studios. So what I ended up doing, or what I ended up figuring out, is that I went to these marketplaces for independent games like Game Jolt and itch.io, And as it turns out, there's actually quite a bit of independent developers that have no sense or like no sort of research arm to it, or anyways, so they don't have like any sort of research, like backing or guidance with that, anyways. Where it was almost like a free game, and there's so much for it. And oftentimes it could be because maybe they're not interested in it, or they have tight budgets and they consider like other roles to be like more important than that, basically. Or sometimes they may just not even know that the games user research even exists. I've even heard that before too. And that was just like at least from the developers that I've worked with, that's what I've experienced anyways, but it may not be speaking for all, of course. So here are some of the games I ended up finding, actually. I basically went to their pages and contacted them through whatever sort of like contact like method they had. So sometimes it was email, sometimes it was just their page. Other times it was actually through Steam, which was quite a workaround, because first you have to actually like add them as a friend before you can even be able to talk to them, which was getting a little messy there. But sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But essentially, the greatest part about this too was that what I was doing was, when I was talking to them, meeting with them, I was offering them free research. So this is right off the bat. I'm saying, hey, like I'll do this for you like entirely for free. It's a service to you, and you can. It's just guidance. You don't have to do things based off of what I say or not. But it's something that can really like potentially help you. And just I also, for me, that was also giving me, the researcher, more practical experience without actually having to be like hired into an actual company at the time, but still being able to get that actual like experience, more so like with an independent developer anyways. And to this day, I will say, for my experience, I have not had a single developer say no yet to this offer, because it's usually like very, very good anyways. Like it's like a win-win for everyone. There might be at some point anyways, I don't know. But yes, essentially, they're getting this free service to them that could potentially help them, while like the researcher is getting like experience that they can actually use and apply more to other situations. But with all those, those people that we've been recruiting, and the games that I gotten anyways, that I've been able to work with, and those developers, I still, of course, I'm not an expert at the time, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm still learning. Even now, I still feel like I have still much to learn. So it was really important to make sure that I had gotten quality constructive criticism and feedback from people who were more experienced anyways, even though there's not really like any classes for this sort of thing. So what I ended up doing is I found at the time, like it still exists today anyways, but there's this GUR mentoring program. So for those of you who don't know, it's this service that is created by this IGDA GUR program, or this group, where they sort of collaborate with lots of more experienced researchers, and then they can partner them up with some people like who want to learn about something anyways for research, a lot of times juniors. And whatever sort of area you're at, or whatever stage you're at, they can help you with creating and achieving your own goals that you wanted to have, basically. And so here's just like a couple of the examples anyways, just like off of the website, but there are lots of them from many different companies. There's a lot of different experiences. Mine was David Tisserin. I don't know if he's in the chat right now or not, but you might see this later at some point. At the time, he was the research manager at Ubisoft. And but yeah, as I was saying anyways before, it's great just because they're giving you this constructive criticism, so that and the developers feel comfortable about this too, because now you're telling them that even though you're still new, you still have someone who's more experienced kind of like behind the scenes, so that they're kind of also helping you and guiding you to give the the best quality work that you can, like for those developers anyways. So here's actually one of those studies that, or a game that I actually worked on after I ended up meeting with my mentor. And at this point, the studies are becoming more sophisticated. I'm actually having more like hard set goals that I'm actually like learning here anyways with this. So this is Jetpack Bear. It's a action adventure like platformer 2D game where you play as a bear and you have a jetpack on you, and this crane stole your bike, and so you thought that was really mean, so you're trying to steal it back, basically. So some of the goals that I started to have, anyways, was that we wanted to see there were these hives and coins that you had to collect throughout the game. So we wanted to see, or the developers wanted to see, like how does the player exactly like prioritize that, and how do they decide like what they're going to collect and what they're not going to collect. They also wanted to see kind of the usability of the controls. Just like was it fluid enough for them to be able to translate what they wanted to do into the game. And then they also kind of wanted to get some sense of the difficulty of completing the levels. And kind of through all this, it was very apparent through even just like the very first test that it's really, really hard keeping track of a lot of data channels when you're just a human being by yourself doing all that. Because I was testing, so I was looking for the time that it took for you to actually complete a level. We were looking at deaths, and then it was also counting the amount of coins you were collecting and the hives. And I was also trying to, at the same time, just generally observe and try to get the context of the game at the same time, which became very overwhelming very, very quickly. And that's just how I learned about that anyways, where, if you try to keep track of too many things at the same time, and get a little off rails. I mean, also to kind of tackle that with this study, I probably could have had different tests where I was testing for only one or two of these different facets at a time and separate them out anyways. But the point here anyways is that, some of the stuff you really can't learn as easily from books anyways, or like from those, from some of those talks and some other things. Like sometimes there are some things that you just learn by actually doing really, or just getting out there doing it yourself. And that's why these kinds of guerrilla like studies can be super valuable to a lot of people anyways. Yeah, anyways, just to kind of trickle back and look at some takeaways for kind of the lessons that you can like kind of take here anyways. Um, your networking and the resources are key. They're huge. Getting to know as many people as you possibly can. We're fortunate enough in our field that there is this Discord server that we have where you can connect with just about anyone from our field, and you can do it pretty openly and pretty easy. You could just basically send them a message in whatever channel there, or you can just direct message them somehow. Which is super helpful. And just any other way that you can get to know them or talk to them is really huge. And can't stress it enough, especially just lots of reading, lots of watching videos, and just learning from others, because over the years, this field has grown a lot, and we've learned a lot, and kind of accumulated this mass wealth of knowledge, especially from that GUR Summit series that's in there as well. But anyways, and so again, kind of going back to the work with the independent developers, there is a lot of very accessible research out there that you can do by meeting with all kinds of developers, and a lot of them can be very, very friendly anyways. And there's a huge amount of developers who would definitely very appreciate like having like this research help, and you to be able to get this experience from that. And that learning from your mistakes is great, especially just, doing any sort of practice or experience with some sort of method, or trying to practice what you see, even if it's not perfect at first. The point is that you're learning, and that it is a way to be able to learn something by making mistakes and trying things and continuously getting better. And of course, that is also why you have the mentors, because they can discuss that with you with all of their experience into doing that. And also, that's me in my backyard, actually, with the Games User Research book. Probably say it is by far the most helpful resource I've had, and it probably is for a lot of people anyways. And for those of you who don't know, it is this sort of compendium of a lot of different lessons that some researchers from around the world have gathered together and put it in one single book. And it was probably a huge project, but some people are actually starting to call it the Gerbil now because it's kind of like the Bible for games user research, I guess. But yeah, super helpful. So if you are interested, anyways, in games user research, or you haven't gotten this book yet and you're in this field, you probably should. There's a lot to learn there. And anyways, I think that's all I have for today. Let's can move ahead on to some questions. Thank you. Let me see here.
You see the QA interface?
Yeah, I see that. Let's see. Hamadi Henderson says, I'm not sure if you addressed this, but when doing the gorilla-like studies, how do you find the participants? That can probably vary to very much depending on like your life situation. I was in high school, so when I created that club, it was almost like a traditional club in the sense where I just kind of put out flyers, and I ended up working with a teacher that I just met that semester, and he helped me create like an announcement to the whole school, because there's like these daily announcements that they do. It's like this news team in a way, but they kind of announce stuff in the school. And so they actually put that up there, and that's how I ended up finding those people. But if you're not really in some sort of organization by itself, it's probably just going to be a lot of like creativity and how you want to find, those people anyways. And there's probably tons of ways. I imagine it's pretty hard right now just because of the whole pandemic and everything. But yeah, we could talk about that later if you want to, with any of those contacts I got up there. But hope that answers your question anyways. Jackie, this is really helpful. How much time did you spend on gorilla testing? Was it weekends, nights? Um, Usually it's 1 or 2 days a week, and it was usually like a couple hours at a time. So I was usually staying there at school till probably like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and then I'd finally come home. Um, and I mean, I'd probably definitely say it was worth it. But especially like if you're going to school or you have a job, it could take a lot of time to like kind of like invest in that at the same time as your other stuff in your life. Um, but I'd probably say about that much. And as far as like the total time, because really the actual testing was the small part, but like the much longer like section of it was really just the analyzing of the data and the planning of the studies anyways, which pretty much took, I'd probably say, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 hours a week. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as long as me or not. Like you find whatever works for you. But that was just kind of what my experience was like in the first place. Let's see. Trying to see if I can get let's see. Andre Felipe Galvis. Hope I said that right. Logistically, how did you manage to do the game testing in the club? So I remember at first it was actually just, so we had this area that was in my school, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically supposed to simulate like a college space basically, because seniors oftentimes they would get these like extra free periods, so they tried to simulate college by giving you less classes and more free time. And so they kind of had this place where they had lots of private rooms. They had like a kitchen and like some other things here and there, where people could hang out and study. So basically, I worked with someone to rent out one of the rooms every week, and I would always have that spot every time. So that's how I did it there, anyways. And then at first, it was just a big room. It kind of depended on what kind of session we were having, whether there was some sort of like participatory design thing or like, like very early on before production, or if it was like during production with like a sort of test. And, so sometimes it would just be one person, but it just depended on the study. At one point we got kicked out because I think like some other club was doing something in there or whatever, so we had to go to another room. That was interesting. But yeah, so that's basically how I did it for there anyways. Let's see. Jason Das, have you tried using Facebook user groups for games user research? I have not. I'm actually not even aware that that was the thing you could do. So maybe you could enlighten me a little bit more on that because that'd be pretty cool. Um, yeah, because I've never even heard of a Facebook user group before. So maybe we could chat about that a little bit after this. Let's see. And an anonymous attendee over here. I've tried reaching out to indie developers with no luck. How do you craft a convincing or message convincing them of the value of the service research can provide? Ooh, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yeah, it was really just I think it was part of the framing. Like it really goes down to framing, honestly, and just kind of exciting them and showing them like the potential of research. I'll have to show you some of my past emails that I've done for them, but it's a lot of times really just this framing about making sure that you don't call their baby ugly, basically, because I've heard a lot of times that um, like when you're working with some developers, they may think that the research team is basically there to fix like the mess, basically, which isn't necessarily true, as a lot of us know, anyways. We're just mostly here to help. So I think a lot of it is really just showing that, um, and making sure that you like kind of communicate that to them, anyways. That like that you're not there to like call their baby ugly. That you're basically there to support. Um, but maybe we could work together sometime. I could kind of help you craft those messages anyways with that sometime. But yes, mostly about the framing. Let's see. Hamadi Henderson, have you conducted any game research online? If so, what tools did you use? I don't think I have yet at this point, actually. I've been trying to watch some talks about it and read some articles about how people do it with with just like the streaming talk that we heard earlier today about like streaming playtesting, basically. Um, that could be one way, anyways. Of course, you'd probably have to make sure that you get the right setup and everything, because it's a little bit more difficult when you're like away from them. There's so much less you can do, but so far I haven't really done much online myself. I mostly just do in-person sessions for me myself, anyways. Uh, did you find any appetite from these teams for regular testing after the first round? Any appetite? Um, I need you to clarify to me kind of like more what the question means, anyways. I'm not sure if I like quite understand like the appetite, basically. But let's see. Have you, did they want more testing after the first round of testing? Yes, in some cases, yes. And some of them, that was kind of all we needed. But with those games that I showed you like earlier over there, some of them we'd had like a couple rounds of iteration, just to make sure that when we made changes that they actually worked or they got the intended result that the developer did actually expect. So in some cases, yes, but a lot of times, yes, it was mostly just multiple rounds of testing. And then I'll try to answer this one more question. I think I'm almost out of time here. Andre asks, have you had any recurrent game devs that come back to you for more tests? Yes, actually, the one I'm working with right now, Longneck Games for ResPlus. I've been working with them for a year and a half now, I think. And I'm actually about to do some post-release research right after today because they're actually supposed to release today. So that'll be interesting. And I've actually recruited several researchers from our community to help me with that. So that'll be a real fun time. That'll be pretty awesome. But I do still keep in touch with them today, even too. Like some people I've worked with, you know, like when I first started in high school, like some people are still talking to me. But yeah. Okay. Well, I guess if there's any other questions that anybody else wants to share, just feel free to reach out to me in contact. I also play Animal Crossing, so if you want to, go ahead and add me on the Switch. But thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Tyler. This is great.